Chapter 1. The Mysterious Invitation, Section 1. The Calm Before the Storm. Elliot Marshall had long retired from the world of high-stakes investigations. The years had been kind to him, and after the last case he had solved a complex international conspiracy, he decided to put down his pen and walk away from the shadows. A life of anonymity in the countryside suited him perfectly. His days were spent tending to his small estate, reading, and occasionally dabbling in amateur gardening. It was, by all accounts, the peaceful life he had always dreamed of. But peace, it seemed, had never quite been meant for him. It was one gray morning in autumn when the letter arrived. The thick envelope, sealed with crimson wax, was placed in his mailbox, the faintest hint of foreign ink trailing across the address. Elliot hesitated for only a moment before tearing it open. The letter was short, its words simple but foreboding. Marshall, you have been summoned. The Big Four are no longer a myth. They are real, and they will stop at nothing to achieve their goals. If you are still the man you once were, I would greatly appreciate your assistance. Time is of the essence. No signature, no return address. Elliot stared at the letter for what felt like an eternity. The Big Four, the very name that had haunted the whispered corners of the intelligence community for decades. A group that operated from the shadows, manipulating global events and influencing nations. It was the stuff of legends, dismissed as conspiracy theory by those who didn't want to believe in the power of such an organization. But Elliot knew better. He had dealt with these most dangerous of adversaries in his time. But the Big Four were something else entirely. If they were real, the world was in grave danger. Section 2. The Call to Action. Elliot was not a man to be easily frightened. His career had prepared him for the unexpected, and he had seen his share of peril. Yet, the letter stirred something deep within him, a reminder of the man he once was, the investigator who had uncovered the most complex webs of deceit. His eyes narrowed as he set the letter down on his desk. The world outside his window was cold and silent, but within him, a storm was beginning to brew. The Big Four had resurfaced, and Elliot knew that he could not turn his back on this. Not now. He had already decided. The call had been made. The game was afoot. Elliot quickly packed his things, leaving behind his peaceful home. The road ahead would be long, dangerous, and filled with uncertainties, but he was determined. He would find the people behind the Big Four, and he would stop them no matter the cost. Chapter 2. The Hidden Power, Section 1. The First Clue. The first lead came from an unlikely source. Elliot was in London, tracing the origins of the letter when he stumbled upon a small, nondescript cafe tucked away on a quiet street. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of coffee, and the soft hum of conversation filled the space. But it was the man sitting alone at a corner table that caught Elliot's attention. The man was middle-aged, dressed in a dark suit with a sharp cut that suggested more than just a passing acquaintance with wealth. He had a weary look in his eyes, as if he had seen too much in his time. His hands were shaking slightly as he sipped his coffee, but it was the brief glance he gave Elliot as he entered the cafe that piqued his interest, and, without hesitation, Elliot took a seat across from the stranger. You know about them, don't you? Elliot asked softly, not giving the man a chance to respond. The Big Four. The man's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. He set down his coffee cup, glancing around to ensure they were not overheard. Who are you? The man asked, his voice low, but filled with suspicion. I'm someone who has been asked to stop them, Elliot replied. And you are someone who knows something. The time for silence is over. I need your help. The man hesitated, then leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper. They're everywhere, he said. The Big Four control everything. Politicians, businessmen, scientists, they pull the strings from behind the scenes. But it's worse than that. They're working on something far more dangerous than you can imagine. Something that could change the course of history. Elliot leaned in closer, his heart racing. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together. But there was so much more to uncover. Chapter 3. The Secret of the Four Section 1. Flashbacks and Revelations. The deeper Elliot dug, the more he realized that the Big Four were not just an international criminal syndicate. They were a global power structure. Their influence stretched across continents, from the heart of Asia to the shores of America. Each of the four had a role to play, and their combined strength was unmatched. The first was Li Changyin, a Chinese mastermind whose reach extended far beyond what most people realized. He controlled a vast network of operatives and resources, all hidden beneath the guise of legitimate businesses. His motives were unclear, but his ambition was undeniable. The second was an American financier, a man whose wealth rivaled that of the world's richest individuals. He used his influence to control markets, economies, and governments, bending them to his will with the subtlety of a master manipulator. The third was a French woman, known only as La Sirène. She was a seductress and a schemer, using her charm and beauty to manipulate powerful men and women alike. But behind her allure was a mind as cold and calculating as any of her counterparts. And the fourth, the most dangerous of them all, was simply known as the Destroyer, a figure shrouded in mystery. With no known face or identity, he was the enforcer of the Big Four, the one who carried out their most brutal tasks. Elliot knew that he was up against something far larger than he had imagined, but he had no choice but to continue. The fate of the world depended on it. Section 2. The Unexpected Ally. The next evening, Elliot found himself seated in a dimly lit room of a back-alley pub in the heart of London. The air was thick with smoke and the low murmur of hushed conversations. But Elliot had no time for distractions. He was waiting for a man named Marcus Drake, a former MI6 agent turned private investigator, who had a reputation for getting his hands dirty in the most dangerous of cases. Marcus entered the room with the kind of presence that immediately drew attention. He was tall, with a broad build and a military demeanor that hadn't faded despite the years. His sharp blue eyes scanned the room before settling on Elliot. "Marshal," Marcus said, his voice rough but cordial. "I assume you know why I'm here." Elliot nodded. "I need information. The Big Four. I've been tracking them. They're everywhere, pulling strings across the globe. And I think they're getting close to something big." Marcus sat down across from Elliot, his expression unreadable. "I've heard the whispers. The Big Four aren't just a myth. But they're not just criminals either. They've been operating for years, controlling markets and politics and even scientific progress. But recently, I've heard talk of a weapon. Elliot's heart skipped a beat. A weapon. Marcus leaned in, lowering his voice. Not just any weapon. Marshall. A force that could change the balance of power. A technology so advanced that it could destroy entire cities or manipulate world economies without anyone ever knowing. This is what they've been working on, and it's almost ready. Elliot was silent for a moment, processing the weight of what Marcus had just said. Do you know where they're building it? Marcus nodded. Somewhere in the deserts of Nevada. The American is overseeing the operations there. They've got a massive facility, buried deep under layers of secrecy. Getting in will be nearly impossible. Then we make it possible, Elliot said firmly, determination in his eyes. We need to find out what they're up to. And we need to do it fast. We're running out of time. Chapter 4. The Descent into Madness. Section 1. A Step Too Far. The days following their meeting were a blur of activity. Elliot and Marcus worked tirelessly, gathering intel, hacking into databases, and interviewing anyone who might have a clue. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous the path became. They were now marked men, their every move watched by unseen eyes. One evening, as Elliot sat at his desk reviewing a series of encrypted messages, his phone rang. It was an unknown number, but he didn't hesitate to answer. Elliot Marshall? A voice on the other end whispered, barely audible. Who is this? Elliot demanded, his instincts kicking in. You don't know me, but I know you. I have information about the Big Four, and I have a message for you. Elliot's grip tightened on the phone. What do you want? A warning. They're coming for you. Marshall, if you don't stop now, you'll regret it. They've already marked you as a threat. The line went dead before Elliot could respond. His mind raced as he processed the message. He had been expecting resistance, but this felt different. The Big Four weren't just watching anymore. They were actively hunting him. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Elliot froze, his heart racing. He moved cautiously to the window and peered outside. A black van was parked across the street. He didn't know who was inside, but he had a feeling they weren't here for a friendly chat. With a sense of urgency, Elliot grabbed his bag and signaled to Marcus. They had to leave, and fast. The Big Four were no longer just a faceless enemy. They had become a force that was closing in, and their plan was more dangerous than Elliot could have imagined. Chapter 5. Revelations in the Dark. Section 1. A meeting of minds. The duo made their way to a secure hideout in the city. It was an old, abandoned warehouse, perfect for keeping a low profile. As they sat in the dim light of the room, Elliot reflected on the trail they had followed. Every lead had led to a dead end, and every person they had trusted had either turned up missing or betrayed them. We need to get to Nevada, Marcus said, breaking the silence. But we can't do it alone. We need a plan, and we need the right tools. Elliot's mind raced. A thought formed, an idea that had been percolating in the back of his mind since the beginning of the case. There's someone who might be able to help us, he said, eyes lighting up. A former ally. Someone who owes me a favor. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Who? A man named Alden Ford. He used to be a top-level operative, but he vanished off the grid years ago. I've kept in contact with him, and he might still have the connections we need. If we can find him, he can get us the resources we need to infiltrate the facility. The two men set their sights on finding Ford, knowing that time was running out. As they prepared for their next move, a new set of questions began to form in Elliot's mind. Who exactly were the Big Four? How far did their influence stretch? And, most importantly, what would they do when they realized Elliot was on to them? Chapter 6, The Final Countdown, Section 1, The Race to Nevada. With Alden Ford's help, Elliot and Marcus found themselves on a private jet, heading toward Nevada. The flight was tense, filled with the unspoken weight of what lay ahead. They had gathered enough intel to know where the Big Four were hiding their weapon, but the challenge would be getting inside and surviving. Once we land, Elliot said, looking at Marcus, we need to move fast. No room for mistakes. Marcus nodded, checking his gear. We'll have to rely on speed and precision. The Big Four have eyes everywhere. If we make it out alive, we'll have to move quickly, grab the intel, and get out before they know what hit them. Section 2. Infiltration. The facility was located in a remote desert valley, surrounded by layers of security. The air was dry, and the heat was almost unbearable. As Elliot and Marcus neared the entrance, the weight of the operation hit him. This was it, the culmination of everything he had fought for. They infiltrated the facility under the cover of darkness, using high-tech tools provided by Alden. The air was thick with tension as they moved deeper into the complex, avoiding detection by the high-tech surveillance systems on. As they reached the heart of the facility, Elliot's breath caught in his throat. There, before him, was a machine unlike anything he had ever seen. It was massive, covered in wires and strange symbols, an instrument of unimaginable power. But there was no time to analyze it. The ground shook as alarms blared to life. They had been discovered. Chapter 7. The Destroyer's End, Section 1. The Final Confrontation. The sound of the alarm echoed through the facility, piercing the night like a scream in the dark. Elliot's heart pounded in his chest as he and Marcus scrambled for cover. The mission had escalated faster than they could have predicted, and the stakes had never been higher. They had found the weapon, but now they had to survive long enough to expose it. "Move!" Elliot hissed, pushing Marcus forward as they darted down a narrow corridor. The walls were lined with steel, the cold air swirling with the scent of oil and dust. The sound of boots echoed from behind them. The facility's security had been alerted. The clock was ticking. Marcus glanced at him, his expression grim. "We need to disable the power before they lock this place down. If they activate the defenses, we won't make it out." Elliot nodded, knowing that Marcus was right. They had only one shot at this, and they couldn't afford to waste it. As they approached a large control room, they heard voices coming from inside. Elliot motioned for Marcus to hold back as he silently moved closer, peering through a small window. Inside, several armed guards stood at attention, their guns casually resting in their hands. But what caught Elliot's attention was the figure standing at the front of the room, a tall, imposing man with a sharp jawline and an unsettling calm in his eyes. The Destroyer, the Big Four's enforcer. the one they called Number 4. His reputation had preceded him, but seeing him in person was an entirely different experience. Cold, calculating, and deadly. He exuded a sense of dominance that sent a shiver down Elliot's spine. "We can't take him head on," Elliot whispered to Marcus. "But we need to disrupt their operations before they lock us in here." Marcus nodded and reached into his bag, pulling out a small device. "I'll trigger the EMP. It should scramble their systems for a few minutes. That'll buy us time." Elliot's eyes narrowed. "Do it." Marcus activated the device, and within seconds, the control room's lights flickered. The guards scrambled, unsure of what was happening. But the destroyer remained eerily still, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. The EMP had done its job temporarily disabling their systems. Now, Elliot shouted, and the two men surged forward, moving fast but with precision. They kicked open the door, startling the guards. Elliot's training kicked in, and within moments, the first guard was neutralized. Marcus quickly took out the second, while Elliot's focus remained solely on the destroyer. The man's gaze locked with Elliot's, and for a split second, time seemed to freeze. There was no fear in the destroyer's eyes, only an icy determination. He wasn't just a soldier. He was the embodiment of the Big Four's power. "You shouldn't have come here," the destroyer said, his voice low and chilling. Elliot took a step forward, his gun trained on the man. "I've come to stop you." The destroyer's lips curled into a faint smile. "You think you can stop us? The Big Four are unstoppable. You're just a man out of his depth." With lightning speed, the destroyer lunged toward Elliot, but Marcus was ready. He moved to intercept, firing a round that forced the destroyer to duck and roll, narrowly avoiding the shot. "Run!" Elliot Marcus shouted. "We can't waste time." But Elliot stood his ground, his eyes fixed on the enforcer. "No, this ends now." With a swift movement, Elliot tossed a small grenade toward the destroyer. The explosion threw the man off balance, allowing Elliot to advance. As the destroyer struggled to regain his footing, Elliot lunged, tackling him to the ground. They grappled, exchanging blows, each strike fueled by the desperation of their situation. "You won't win," the destroyer spat, his voice barely audible above the sounds of the chaos. "I already have," Elliot replied, using all his strength to subdue the man. With a final effort, Elliot twisted the destroyer's arm, forcing him into submission. The enforcer let out a strangled cry before collapsing, defeated but not broken. Elliot stood over him, breathing heavily, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He looked down at the man who had been the ruthless executor of the Big Four's will. It was over, or so he thought. Chapter 8. The Legacy of the Big Four. Section 1 Aftermath. The facility was in ruins. The destruction of their weapon was only the beginning. Elliot and Marcus had done it. They had taken down the destroyer, infiltrated the heart of the Big Four's operation, and sabotaged the weapon that could have altered the course of history. But their victory came at a great cost. The next few days were a blur. Elliot was barely able to process the events that had unfolded. He had expected to feel victorious, to bask in the sense of accomplishment that always followed a successful mission. Instead, he felt empty, drained, as if something far more sinister had been lurking beneath the surface. It was the letter that had started it all. the one that had drawn him back into this world of shadows. He had been warned that the Big Four would stop at nothing, but he never truly understood the depth of their reach until now. The destruction of their weapon was just the beginning of a much larger game. The Big Four might be weakened, but they were far from defeated. Their influence still permeated the global stage, their tendrils reaching into every corner of society. And as Elliot looked out over the city skyline, a chilling thought crossed his mind. The Big Four were not a group of criminals. They were a force of nature, and there were still more of them out there. Section 2. A New Beginning. Days later, Elliot sat alone in his office, the weight of the case finally settling on his shoulders. He had defeated the destroyer and dismantled their weapon, but it wasn't enough. The Big Four had left a mark on the world, and that mark was impossible to erase. He could hear the faint sound of a knock on the door. Marcus stepped inside, his expression as unreadable as always. "It's not over, is it?" Marcus asked, his voice heavy with understanding. Elliot looked at him, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. "No, it's far from over." The battle against the Big Four had only just begun. Chapter 9. The Hidden Hand, Section 1. The Unexpected Ally. Elliot leaned back in his chair, the weight of his decisions pressing heavily on him. He had just dismantled the Big Four's operation, or so he had believed. The defeat of the destroyer was a significant blow, but the feeling of victory was quickly fading. The Big Four were still out there, and their network was vast. He couldn't afford to relax. The phone rang, cutting through the silence. Elliot's hand instinctively reached for it, expecting the usual reports. But the voice on the other end was unfamiliar. "Elliot Marshall," the voice said, smooth and calm. "I trust you remember me. I think it's time we had a conversation." Elliot's mind raced. The voice sounded oddly familiar, though he couldn't place it. "Who is this?" "Someone who knows far more than you might think. We need to talk about the Big Four and your next move." Elliot's instincts screamed at him to hang up, but he didn't. "I don't have time for games." "Then make time," the voice replied. "I'm in London. I suggest you meet me tomorrow, midnight. Don't bring anyone. You won't regret it." "Sick?" But the line went dead. Elliot stared at the receiver for a moment before hanging it up. He had no choice. Whoever this was, they were connected to the Big Four in some way, and he couldn't afford to ignore it. But who could this mysterious figure be? And why had they reached out now? Section 2. A Dangerous Gamble. The next night, Elliot arrived at the location, an old, decrepit building tucked away in an alley. It was the kind of place that seemed to be frozen in time, forgotten by the city's hustle, the perfect place for a secret meeting. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dust and decay. The room was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb hanging overhead. Elliot stepped carefully into the center of the room, his senses on high alert. He had learned to trust no one in this game, especially not after everything that had happened. The voice had been right. No one was following him. He was alone. The sound of footsteps echoed from the shadows, and a figure stepped into the light. It was a woman, tall and imposing, with sharp features and dark, piercing eyes. Her presence was magnetic, and there was an air of danger that seemed to cling to her. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something familiar about her. "Do you know who I am?" the woman asked, her voice soft but filled with an undeniable authority. Elliot frowned, studying her closely. I've never seen you before in my life. She smiled faintly, the corners of her lips curling just enough to show a hint of amusement. I thought that might be your reaction. But you've seen me, or rather, you've heard of me. I was known as Number 3, the French woman. Elliot's heart skipped a beat. Number 3, the elusive figure who had always been a mystery. The woman behind the charm. The manipulations, the one who had played the dangerous game of power within the Big Four. Number 3, Elliot repeated, his mind racing. But I thought you were dead, she interrupted. Not quite. You have many misconceptions about the Big Four. Marshall, we're not just a group of criminals, but an order, a force that works behind the scenes. And now, you're part of that world, whether you like it or not. Elliot's pulse quickened. He had expected danger, but this was different. He had come to destroy the Big Four, not to join them. What do you want from me? He asked, his voice steady, but laced with caution. I want you to understand the bigger picture. The Big Four isn't just about power, wealth, or control. It's about survival, she said, her eyes gleaming with intensity. You've made a dangerous enemy, Marshall, but you've also made a powerful ally. The destruction of the destroyer was a blow. Yes, but it's only the beginning. There are others, and they are far more dangerous than you know. Elliot's mind was reeling. Then why help me? She took a step closer, her gaze locking with his, because, Marshall, you can be useful. You're smart, resourceful, and you have the courage to face what's coming. But you can't do it alone. The Big Four has many faces, and their influence reaches far. They've created something more dangerous than any weapon, an ideology that will change the world. Elliot swallowed hard. What are you asking me to do? Help me take them down, she said simply. But understand this. It's not just about fighting them. It's about understanding their endgame. The Big Four controls more than just governments and businesses. They control ideas, movements, and people. They have planted the seeds of chaos in every corner of the world. And soon, no one will be able to stop them. Chapter 10. The Return of the Shadow Section 1. The Bigger Plan. The following days were filled with restless nights and frantic planning. Elliot had never been more uncertain. He had always believed that the downfall of the destroyer would be the end of his fight. But now, after meeting Number 3, he realized just how wrong he had been. The Big Four was not just a criminal organization. It was an ideology, a force with a far-reaching agenda that had been in the making for decades. The disappearance of key figures, the rise of global unrest, the manipulation of events, it was all part of a larger plan. And Elliot had unknowingly been thrust into the center of it. He spent hours poring over documents and intelligence reports with Marcus, trying to piece together the next step. But every lead seemed to disappear into nothingness. The true enemy was hidden. Their influence spread thin, making it nearly impossible to track. As the days passed, Elliot found himself growing more paranoid. The Big Four was everywhere. Every conversation felt like it could be an ambush. Every person he met could be a spy. The weight of the world seemed to bear down on him. and the lines between friend and foe were becoming increasingly blurred. Section 2. A Friend in the Shadows. One evening, just as Elliot was beginning to lose hope, he received an encrypted message. It was from an old contact, a hacker who had once helped him out of a tight spot during a previous mission. The message was short, but the contents sent a chill through his bones. They found you, Marshall. You're not the only one hunting them, but trust no one, not even me. Elliot's heart raced as he processed the words. Someone was hunting him. Someone even more dangerous than the Big Four. And if they were after him, they were also after the information he had uncovered. The game had changed once again. Elliot turned to Marcus, his face grim. We've got to move. Now. Someone knows we're on to them. And I don't think it's just the Big Four anymore. Marcus's face hardened. Who? I don't know yet. But we've just become a target in a game far bigger than we can imagine. Chapter 11. The Edge of Destruction, Section 1. The Final Revelation. As Elliot and Marcus prepared for the next phase of their mission, they knew the risks. They were no longer just fighting against an organization, they were fighting against an ideology, a force that had infiltrated every layer of society. But despite the growing danger, Elliot felt something new stirring inside him, a sense of purpose, a drive to finish what he had started. The final confrontation was drawing near, but would they be ready when the shadows that controlled the world finally revealed themselves? Chapter 12. The Edge of Destruction, Section 1. The hunt begins on. The encrypted message had come from an old friend, but Elliot wasn't sure whether to trust it. Who else could be pulling the strings behind the Big Four? The danger was palpable, and he could feel it closing in on him from all sides. But one thing was certain, time was running out. He sat in his small, dimly lit office, staring at the map on the wall. He had crossed off nearly every lead, traced each thread until it had all led to dead ends. But now, a new player had entered the game, someone with enough power to make even the Big Four nervous. Marcus stood by the window, his arms crossed, deep in thought. We need to find out who's really behind all this. Elliot, the Big Four, the chaos, the assassination attempts. It's not just coincidence. Elliot leaned back in his chair. I've been thinking the same thing. And I think I have an idea who we should speak to next. But we can't trust anyone else. Not even number 3. Marcus shot him a questioning look. You're still thinking about her, aren't you? Elliot nodded. She's dangerous, Marcus. But she's not the only one playing this game. We need to find the puppet master, the one who's been pulling their strings all along. The pieces were falling into place. They had been on the right track all along. But now they were closer than ever to uncovering the final layer of the conspiracy. Section 2. A Dangerous Ally. That night, they met with number 3 again. This time, they didn't speak in the dark, abandoned room. Instead, they met at a high-end restaurant in the heart of London, a public space where they could blend in among the crowd. Number 3 arrived alone, dressed in a sleek, tailored black dress. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being watched. Her presence immediately drew attention, even though she maintained a calm, composed demeanor. I see you've come, she said, taking a seat across from Elliot. Her eyes flickered. studying him with an intensity that made him uneasy. "I didn't think you'd be back after our last conversation." Elliot didn't flinch. "I don't have time for games anymore. Who's really behind the Big Four? And what is it that they want?" She smiled faintly, leaning forward as though considering his question carefully. "You're not foolish, Marshall. You've been piecing things together. You know more than you let on. But what you don't understand is that the Big Four isn't about just control or money. It's about reshaping the world, the chaos we've orchestrated, the revolutions, the wars. They're just stepping stones." Elliot's patience was thinning. "You still haven't answered the question. Who's in charge?" Number three's expression remained neutral, but her eyes flickered with something darker. "The true power behind the Big Four is not a man nor a woman. It is an idea, a movement that has been quietly spreading for decades. Its origins are in the shadows, but its reach is global. The name you should fear is the architect." The architect Elliot repeated, a cold shiver running down his spine. "What does that mean?" "A man who believes in the destruction of the old order. A visionary, some would say," she replied, her voice softening with a strange reverence. "The architect has been shaping history from behind the scenes, guiding those who are willing to follow his vision. The Big Four is merely a tool to help bring about the world he has always dreamed of." Elliot felt the weight of her words sink in. "So, this isn't just about power. It's about changing the world." She nodded. "Exactly. The Big Four is only the beginning. The architect's final plan is close to being realized. If you think stopping the Big Four will end this, you're wrong. They're just the beginning. The architect has bigger plans." Chapter 13. The Architect's Blueprint, Section 1. The Grand Plan. Elliot's mind was racing as he left the restaurant. The architect. A name that seemed to hold all the answers, yet also created more questions. Who was this person? And how had they managed to manipulate the world from the shadows for so long? Marcus had been waiting for him outside the restaurant. The moment Elliot stepped into the car, Marcus turned to him, his expression serious. "So, who is it? Who's pulling the strings?" Elliot exhaled slowly. "The architect. Apparently, he's the mastermind behind all of this. The Big Four. The chaos. The upheaval in the world. It's all part of a larger plan to reshape everything." Marcus frowned. "A man, then, or a group?" Elliot shook his head. "I don't know yet, but we're closer than ever." That night, they began piecing together the fragments of information they had. They discovered that the architect was a shadowy figure, operating under multiple aliases across the globe. But no one seemed to know his true identity. The more they searched, the more elusive he became. But then, a breakthrough came. They found a lead pointing to a location in the Swiss Alps, an isolated facility that was rumored to be the headquarters of the architect's operations. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead they had. Section 2. The Descent into Darkness. As they boarded a private jet to Switzerland, Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into the lion's den. The closer they got to the architect, the more the danger intensified. It was no longer just about the Big Four. It was about everything they had fought for, and everything they had yet to lose. Upon landing in the remote mountains, They made their way to the facility. It was an old, fortress-like compound, surrounded by high-tech security and layers of protection. They would need all their skills to infiltrate it. Elliot and Marcus carefully made their way inside, using the tools they had been provided with. The facility was vast and cold, with a sense of foreboding that seemed to pulse through the walls. As they ventured deeper, they discovered a series of high-tech laboratories and data centers. The architect's operations were far more advanced than they had ever anticipated. But it wasn't until they reached the inner sanctum that they uncovered the true extent of the architect's plan. Inside, on a large, circular table, were blueprints. Not for weapons, but for the re-engineering of entire nations, social systems, economies. Even the way people thought and behaved, it was all there. The architect's vision was nothing short of world domination. He had developed a way to manipulate entire populations, to shape the future according to his designs. As Elliot stood in the middle of the room, staring at the blueprints, he realized the full scope of the threat. This wasn't just a conspiracy. It was a revolution in the making. The Big Four were only a fraction of what the architect was capable of. They were running out of time. Section 3. The Final Showdown. Elliot and Marcus continued to explore the facility, knowing that they were being hunted. The architect's agents were closing in, and they could sense the walls closing in around them. They needed answers, and they needed them fast. But in the final chamber, they found something more chilling than any weapon or plan. A screen flickered to life, and on it appeared a face Elliot recognized all too well. It was number 3. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a figure, a man with cold eyes, a calculating mind, and a smile that sent a chill down Elliot's spine. The architect, and with that, the final confrontation began. Chapter 14. The Architect's Revelation, Section 1. The Unmasking. The screen flickered once more, and the image of number 3, standing side by side with the figure who called himself the architect, grew sharper. The room seemed to darken around Elliot, and the weight of their presence pressed in on him. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the figure on the screen, a man who had remained a phantom, hiding in the shadows for years. The architect's face was sharp and angular, with cold, calculating eyes that seemed to pierce through Elliot's very soul. There was something unsettling about the way he stood, not just as a man, but as a symbol of the entire revolution that was brewing. Elliot Marshall, this architect said, his voice calm but chilling. I've been expecting you. Elliot's blood ran cold. He had known that they were getting closer to something big, but this was beyond anything he had anticipated. You know who I am? Elliot asked, his voice barely above a whisper, the realization dawning on him that he had been caught in a much larger game than he could have ever imagined. Oh, I know more than just your name, the architect replied with a smile that sent a chill through the room. You've been a thorn in my side for far too long, Elliot, but you've also proven yourself useful. You've uncovered pieces of the puzzle, but now it's time to see the whole picture. Behind the architect, number 3's expression remained unreadable, but there was a glint of something in her eyes. Was it admiration, or perhaps something more dangerous? Elliot steeled himself, knowing that the moment he had feared was here. You've been pulling the strings all along, he said, his voice laced with frustration. The big four, the chaos, the manipulation, it's all been part of your plan. The architect chuckled softly, his cold gaze never leaving Elliot. Not just my plan. Marshall, it's the future. The world has been on the brink of collapse for far too long, and it needs someone like me to guide it into the new era. You're insane, Marcus muttered under his breath, unable to hide his disgust. The architect's gaze shifted to Marcus, his smile never faltering. Am I, or am I simply the first to see the truth? The systems that govern your world are broken. Marshall, corruption, greed, inequality. They are the foundation upon which the old world has been built. And now, it's time for something new. Elliot's mind raced. He had thought the Big Four was just a criminal syndicate. But this was a movement, an ideology designed to reshape the entire world. The architect wasn't just a criminal mastermind, he was a revolutionary. You want to destroy the old order, Elliot said, narrowing his eyes. But at what cost? You're willing to tear everything down: the economy, the governments, entire societies, just for your own vision of the world. Sometimes, the architect replied softly, you must destroy before you can rebuild. The words hung in the air, and Elliot felt a heavy weight pressing down on him. The architect was a man who believed in his cause so fully that he was willing to sacrifice everything and everyone in pursuit of it. But Elliot wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Not when the fate of the world was on the line. Section 2. The Choice. Elliot and Marcus exchanged a glance, both of them feeling the enormity of the moment. The architect's plans were in motion, and it seemed like nothing would stop him. But there was something else at play here, something that didn't sit right with Elliot. If you believe so strongly in your vision, Elliot said, stepping forward, then why are you hiding in the shadows? Why don't you show the world who you really are? The architect's smile faded, and for the first time, Elliot saw something like genuine curiosity in his eyes. You think the world is ready for me, Marshall? You think they would accept change so drastic? No. It's not time for me to reveal myself, not yet. But soon, very soon. Soon? Marcus echoed. You think you can just force the world to accept your twisted version of peace? Peace. The architect laughed, a dark, hollow sound. Peace is a lie. Control is the only thing that matters, and I will have it. Elliot's heart raced. The architect wasn't just a man. He was a force that had learned to bend people's will, manipulate entire systems, and control the world from behind the scenes. He had played his cards well, staying hidden until now. But Elliot could sense a crack in his confidence. The man's obsession with his own vision made him vulnerable. You're wrong, Elliot said, his voice steady but firm. The world won't follow you. It won't accept you. The architect's eyes flashed with cold fury. You think you can stop me? You think you can stop what's already in motion? You're too late, Marshall. The revolution is already here. Section 3. The Final Gambit. Without warning, the ground beneath them shook. The walls of the facility groaned as if they were alive. Elliot instinctively drew his weapon, but the architect raised his hand. You're too late, the architect said again, his tone calm, almost satisfied. I've activated the final phase. Your victory means nothing now. Elliot's mind raced. What have you done? Let's just say The world will soon realize that it cannot function without a guiding hand. But unlike the Big Four, I don't hide in the shadows. When the time comes, you'll see. The lights flickered, and a series of alarms blared. The facility was coming to life in a way Elliot had never seen before. He had to move fast. They had to stop this, or the world would descend into chaos. Marcus, we need to destroy the core. Now, Elliot shouted, his voice sharp with urgency. They rushed toward the central chamber, where a massive machine pulsed with energy. It was a device unlike any Elliot had ever seen. It hummed with a power that seemed almost alive, and its purpose was clear. It was the architect's final weapon, a tool that could reshape the world in his image. As they moved closer, Elliot could hear the architect's voice echoing through the facility. It's over. Marshall, you can't stop what's already been set in motion. But Elliot was determined. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to let this madman's vision destroy everything. He pulled a detonator from his bag, his finger hovering over the button. Goodbye, architect, Elliot whispered. With a press of the button, the room exploded in a blinding flash of light. Section 4. After the storm. The explosion echoed through the mountains, shaking the very foundations of the facility. When the dust settled, the structure was in ruins. The architect's machine was destroyed, and with it, his plans. Elliot stood amid the wreckage, breathing heavily, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The world was safe for now, but the cost had been high. He had stopped the architect's revolution, but there was no denying the mark it had left on him. He turned to Marcus, who was standing a few feet away, his expression grim. We've won, but at what cost? Elliot didn't have an answer. He had destroyed the architect's plans, but the world would never be the same. There would always be others, and the seeds of chaos had been planted. The fight was never truly over. Epilogue. The unseen threat. Months later, Elliot returned to his quiet life. But the shadow of the architect still lingered. The world had been saved, but something deep inside Elliot knew that the story wasn't finished. There were always whispers in the dark, always new threats on the horizon. And as the world turned, Elliot knew one thing for certain: the Big Four might be gone, but the battle for the future had just begun.